So back in 2010, I had returned from Iraq from my last deployment. I was just a young officer, which is interesting to say because I was an old young officer. I had been in the Navy for roughly 18 years and then I took a commission. So I went from senior enlisted to a junior officer, which, looking back, it was primarily for the retirement benefits. However, from a career standpoint, it didn't work out very well on deployment as a young officer without the support of the senior enlisted community, without the support really of the two bosses that I had. I had a Navy boss and I had an Army boss, believe it or not, and I came home with a tremendous amount of post-traumatic stress. My marriage was in shambles. I wasn't sleeping. I was just stacking my plate with everything that I could possibly do in order to avoid feeling the anxiety and the post-traumatic stress that I was feeling. So I had probably combat PTS is what I was later diagnosed with. In my dad got sick and he passed away, and I was working full time, going to school full time, and had a family, and still dealing 5 years later with this post traumatic stress. It was not a good time. However, I learned a ton during that time. Let's get into it.
This is the tension, the pattern you can't see. This is the moment you finally break free. Know what's running underneath before it takes you down. Welcome to the tension lab. This is your ground.
All right, welcome back to the Tension Lab podcast. I am your host, Rudy Swigert. We are in episode 12 of season 1, and I am super excited week after week, day by day, as we've been taking time here within the Tension Lab to discuss several different topics, but primarily it is who we are outside of our role. This is based around my forthcoming book, Stewarding the Tension. And it is one that says, how do we carry in leadership all of the different aspects and attributes of our livelihood that we have, either in ministry or in the marketplace? And then what happens when that role comes to an end, or it's a planned exit or an unplanned exit, and what takes place surrounding those things. Now, in my introductory story, I talked about the moments between what happens to me and how I responded in the most consequential real estate in my leadership. Most high capacity leaders, they skip over it entirely, not because they lack discipline, but because they were shaped in environments that rewarded speed. And so when I came back from being overseas with a ton of post-traumatic stress, I was still a high speed, low drag kind of guy and a can-do mindset after coming out of just a 14-month deployment, supporting an Army mission overseas, working for a Navy boss and an Army boss at the same time. And when I got home, I was wearing the same uniform 48 hours later that I had left the sandbox in, and sitting around the kitchen table with the family. And the biggest concern was, were we going to go to this fast food restaurant or that fast food restaurant to grab dinner? And internally in my body, I was processing all of the different things that were still left on the other side of the world. So I added and stacked and added and stacked many things to my schedule in that time so that I didn't have to sit in just the sheer hypervigilance that my body was operating in. So we're going to take the stigma of that right off the table. If you're a first responder, active duty military, if you've ever been in any of those types of environments where we don't really talk about those things here because we've got a mission to perform, I want to just encourage you that that were going to take those things right off the table. In those moments, I felt like I couldn't handle it, and I couldn't. I should have listened to that part of my body and my psychology that said, you know what, I needed more time. I needed more time to process. I did not pause. I went from the feeling right into the activity, thinking I was going to be self-soothing in those ways. And if I couldn't do that because everybody else was doing that, they were just coming home and going right back to work, and it was business as usual. I felt as though I was broken in some way, but I wasn't broken because I reacted fast. And for most high capacity leaders, speed is a trained and rewarded behavior. The military culture named it, right? High speed, low drag. The corporate culture rewarded it. Fast decisions, no hesitation. We respected the integrity and the trust that leaders had in making decisions. There was minimal redundancy. In the ministry world, the pastoral culture, they often hide insecurities. They need to appear steady at all costs. Their circle of friends gets very small. The amount of emotion that we're allowed to admit in front of congregational members is very little. It's one of support, one of steadfast and stoic presence that helps another. And inside, we ourselves need a lot of help as well. We're to appear steady, project calm, to perform and console. And internally, underneath everything, we need those very things. So this is scientific, right? Because emotion moves before thought. Emotion moves before thought. You feel a certain way, you are moving already in a certain direction in order either to protect yourself against fear or sadness or survival mode, being hurt, and your emotional drivers will move you before you think about those things from a logical perspective. That's biology. That's not character failure, which is what we mostly assign those things. Stress conditions the nervous system towards hypervigilance. When I was overseas, I couldn't trust anybody. I thought the bombs were going to fall out of the sky at any moment and blow us up. That was the reality of the circumstances over there. And so I paid attention to every single nook and cranny of where my exits were, where my safe places were, who I could trust and whom I couldn't trust, what I was eating, what I wasn't eating, vehicles we were riding in, roads that we were riding on, aircraft that we were flying in, the people that were flying in those aircraft with us, who was flying the plane, who was serving the meals, who was handing me the towel at the gym. All of those things were hyper vigilant. And my stress levels conditioned my nervous system to continue to operate in those ways. High threat environments lower the triggering threshold. Mortar attacks or passive aggressive email, my body, the system would fire in the same way. So I'm going to talk about protection as fuel for reaction. Underneath speed is the need to protect. And for leaders, it's often the need to protect your identity. I'm in charge. I've got a handle of these things. You need to respect that. And we're going to be moving in this direction. Thank you very much. If you push back on those things, then I may have identity collapse, or I may try to protect my identity in a way that is unhealthy. That is part of the tension that we steward. So when role and identity are fused together, when they fuse together, when what you do is who you are, and I've heard many people say those words in the same sentence. It's Joe. It's what he does. It's who he is, and that's just a normal thing to communicate. But it's not who we are. It is what we do. But if you have identity and role fusion, when what you do is who you are, then any challenge to that is going to land as a challenge to yourself. I'm going to say that again because I think it's important. I think we need to digest it. right? Because I talked about in the same sentence a mortar attack, and I talked about a passive aggressive email. Those are two vastly different things. However, internally, the nervous system is processing them in the very same way because I have fused my identity with my role. And any challenge to that role, any pushback on a decision becomes a threat to the self. The system doesn't distinguish between a performance critique and an existential attack. It just goes straight to the defense. It defends. Instinctually, we defend competence, we protect influence, we avoid vulnerability until the first brick shifts. And when the first brick shifts, everything starts to shift with it. So we have to fall into rhythms. This is part of what stewarding the tension is about. This episode is going to be speaking on things that I write about in chapter 11 of the book. And here's the cool thing, just a quick break from this, is that I'm getting emails and contact from people that have been listening to the show and to the different episodes, and they're relating in their context to the things that we've been talking about in the book. In one of them is a judge and a lawyer, and he's relating to these different things as well. I just got an email earlier this week about a law attorney who recognizes these patterns in the marital context, in the relationship context between husband and wife. And of course, you would see these patterns in a relational context between husband and wife, in family law, in family court, because we now begin to observe with this language and this, we have an understanding of what it is that's taking place, is we can recognize the battleground that is taking place internally on the inside of people and how it comes out on the outside of people and lands on other people, especially the people that are closest to us, right? So the whole idea of what we've been talking about underneath it all is increasing our emotional intelligence and using our disc behavioral patterns to start to recognize things that take place within ourselves, how we feel about those things, how we behave when those feelings hit, and how they come out and impact husbands, wives, co-workers, subordinates, leaders, children, fill in the blank. And if you recognize the biological and instinctual patterns that you've been building around yourself since childhood, then you'll start to understand and get curious about the defense. Why did that passive aggressive message, email, text message, you name it, whatever it is, why did that land on identity collapse in the same manner as, say, a mortar attack? Why do we need to put up the defense and protect ourselves in those ways? And I've said this before on this show, and you may have heard these things, is that in a business setting or in a family setting, when you start to go on the defensive, if you feel that you have to defend yourself, you've already lost. And the reason that I say that is because you lost when you felt that you had to go and protect something against a threat. Maybe you perceived that something was coming at you in a threatening way, and therefore you stood up to protect it. Listen, I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. I've got a train wreck of a divorce that took place back in 2017, resulting from everything that I described at the beginning of this show. Just stacked it up, tried to push it down, tried to self-medicate with alcohol, anger, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, you fill it in, it was there for me. So after that, in the aftermath, is where we start to get curious, like, what the heck was all of that about? Instinctually, we defend competence, we protect influence, we avoid vulnerability until that first brick shifts. And culturally, here in the Western world, and I don't know where it is around the world, but culturally here, at least in the United States, we used to have commercials for deodorant that would say, don't ever let them see you sweat, right? Meaning we can't show emotion. We have to be poised at all times. Leaders are often rewarded for appearing unaffected until the cracks appear. So this is pattern memory. If you've ever been in a high conflict home, if you've ever grown up in a dysfunctional home or with a dysfunctional family, or if you're in a hostile work environment or a volatile workplace or a high stakes environment, if you've ever been in those things long enough, then your body learns to anticipate threat and you start reacting before the other person finishes talking. Like if you've ever been in any sort of like counseling discussion where you hear one person say, they're not listening, they're forming the defense before I'm even done talking, then you understand what it is that I'm talking about here. You've already loaded the response before the message arrives. This isn't weakness. I want to keep iterating these things. This isn't weakness, it's not brokenness, it's conditioning. And however, conditioning can be interrupted. We're not slave to it. We can readjust and recondition. So there's a 4-step loop, which is a sequence that most leaders execute unconsciously dozens of times a day, maybe even hundreds of times a day. Right? Here's what this loop looks like. The first part of it is that something is communicated, whether it's written or verbal, something is said. And in response to whatever it is that was put out there in communication, there is emotion that is assigned to it. Maybe your emotion spikes because of something that was said. And then you will assign meaning to what was said, either rightly or wrongly. You will assign a meaning. You may insert your own assumptions about what was said, especially if it was written rather than verbal. And then you're going to deliver your response. So the 4-step loop, something was said, there was an emotion attached to it, meaning was assigned to it, and response was delivered. The danger isn't the loop itself. The danger is the speed at which the response is delivered. And the assignments of meaning that happen in step 3 are almost entirely shaped by unprocessed history, not present reality. So here's the problem. This is where the real damage happens, is when we assign this meaning or we make assumptions based on what we think we know that was being communicated or wasn't being communicated. If you've ever heard somebody say, you know what, that's not what I meant. And maybe indeed it's not what they meant, but it was what they said. And then meaning was assigned to it on the other side. And so we have to come back and be careful here. We have to be careful here because it is where all of the assumptions fill things in. We stop listening to the words that were said and we start inferring our own emotional responses and assumptions into the conversation. We insert existing biases towards the sender. We will take our current stress load and apply it to our emotional bandwidth, and then unhealed wounds around competence, respect, or belonging will start to surface, and we'll fire back. We'll fire back very quickly, and sometimes it is not the right call. It's not the right call. I've said this in other episodes that if my wife were ever to get upset with me because I've left the cap off the toothpaste, I know that it has nothing to do with the cap and the toothpaste. So what we learn is that people aren't reacting to reality. What they're reacting to are their unexamined interpretation of reality. So here's what other people experience, right? People don't experience your intention, right? So if you say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, even though it was received that way. People don't experience your intention at all. They experience your reaction. And with each unprocessed reaction, the relational environment shifts slowly, quietly, and cumulatively, meaning it will stack. With each reaction, people are keeping that invisible check mark in order to keep track of what it is that's going on and how you've responded in the past. Checklist. That's the word I was looking for. That's what happens when you get old. The invisible checklist. They're saying, yep, there he did it again. And oh, there she did it again. And we have to learn to be careful when we're speaking to people if they're in that type of mindset, because you never know what side of the bed they're going to wake up on, or how they're going to react, or how they're going to respond. And this is how marriages break down. This is how relationships break down. This is how leadership leaks, right? This is how teams become less connected. This is where performance measures start to go down because of an unpredictable emotional intensity that's taking place in leadership, which reduces trust. When trust decreases, communication slows down and innovation stalls, and the team learns to manage you instead of work with you. At home, there's presence without engagement, right? He or she comes home and goes straight to their chair, and turns on the TV and communicates they don't want to be bothered because it was that kind of day, and we just go absent. And the family learns to leave you alone when you're like that. And over years, couples end up waking up one day and say, I'm living with a total stranger. And I wonder if the attorney that reached out to me in family law has heard those words time and time again. I woke up one day and I didn't know who my spouse was, because things are swept under the rug over and over again. And we think that they go away when we sweep them under the rug. But what happens is we end up tripping over the rug. And I can speak to that out of personal experience. This is the loop that we put into place for ourselves, and it's ridiculous. As a matter of fact, I call it the ridiculous loop. It's what happens when reactive patterns go unexamined long enough to become an identity, and it works like this. A limiting belief that one might set for themselves, something like, oh, they don't respect me. My family doesn't care about me. My kids don't listen to me. My wife mocks me in front of me. And those things may be true, but when you start to say they don't respect me, it becomes your bias, and the bias activates confirmation scanning. You start to look around and say, oh, there it is again. They don't respect me. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's an example of disrespect. And so this, if you look for the evidence, you're going to find it. You're going to, whatever your bias is, whatever you've told yourself, whatever limiting belief you've placed upon your language. I'm not a morning person. That's a limiting belief. You've assigned an identity to your behavior. Well, maybe you just wake up slow and that's okay, right? But if your spouse isn't a morning person and they snap back at you in the morning for something that you didn't do, you can assign that limiting belief. Oh, it's okay. You can excuse it. They're just not a morning person. And, maybe I asked him a question and I expected an answer. How silly of me. I shouldn't have done that. The defensive response creates the very dynamic the person was trying to avoid. And now the belief begins to feel even more true. Pushback for leadership feels like a loss of influence. Disagreement feels like a threat to credibility. Feedback feels like proof of failure. And one interaction becomes this story: I am a failure. Everything that has done gets assigned with the limiting belief bias that feeds into the identity that says, at the core level, this is who I am. And these are lies from the pit of hell. These are not true. I would encourage you to check your limiting beliefs against what is true. So there's an identity collapse sequence. There's an inaccurate perception and your defensive response. And then there's a relational withdrawal in others. And there's perceived confirmation and the identity statement. And this happens so fast. It could happen in 60 seconds without pause. There's no exit ramp. It goes straight from pushback to I suck. right? And so patterns shape identity when they go unexamined. But the loop loses its power in the moment you name it. In the moment it's named, awareness will break the automation, right? This is that increased EQ, right? Self-awareness, and after that becomes self-regulation. When you get curious about your pattern instead of just executing in it, when you ask, why did that land that way? Why did that email feel like a full frontal attack internally? When you ask those questions and you take a pause instead of just firing back, you start to step outside of the loop. And that's where the pause lives. In each and every chapter of the book, I introduce a tool. In this chapter, we're talking about the pause principle. The tool is the pause gap, and it is definitely not intuitive for us that are fast movers, big decision makers. We don't have time for waste. We're impatient. The pause gap is the moment between what happened and how you responded. It's almost invisible. And most people don't even know it exists, but it's there. And it's where everything can change. The pause gap isn't about stopping the moment from moving ahead. It's about creating space within the moment to calmly assess what's taking place. And there's 4 steps to this principle. Step 1 is you're going to notice the trigger, the rocket attack or the email. You're going to notice the trigger. You're going to name the activation, right? Where's it at in your body? Does your chest get tight and your heart beat faster? Do you clench your jaw, right? Do you urge to shut down or fire back? What just happened? Notice the trigger. What did I experience? What did I see? What did I hear? Right? This is where autopilot ends and awareness begins. And then step 2 is you're going to name the story. Like, my initial response to go this way came from where? What narrative just formed? Was it my assumption about the other person or my experience with the other person? Or is it something completely different? What meaning was assigned? And then was that meaning accurate? And then I want you to ask yourself, and as you're naming the story, is that what feels threatened? Is it your authority? Is it your respect? Is it your competence or something differently? What is under fire? Because unnamed threats will run the room, without a doubt. Named threats can be worked with. The third step is we're going to create space. Or can I pause before responding? Do I need to hit send on that email now? Do I need to get up out of my chair and go and address this thing with this specific person? Or can I take a pause? And the answer, outside of any urgent, life or death emergency, the answer is yes, you can take a pause, even if the other person is sitting in the room with you. It's okay to sit in silence and take a pause before responding. What would it look like just to take a breath? Take one breath here. Not a therapy session, right? You don't need to phone a friend and have a full, cycle of therapeutic, talk counseling. It's just a breath. It's a microsecond of intentionality. It's small, but it is huge. Fast is slow, the Army used to say, and slow is smooth. So in order for the job to get done smoothly, we don't need to rush. And so we move from reaction to intention. From that space, we choose, not out of self-preservation or defense, but from values. We choose from values, from who you've decided to be, not from who you're afraid that you are. This isn't passivity, this is quiet authority. And so here's what consistent practice of this can produce. And it's going to take you some time to work through the tool. You're not going to be able to get it perfect each time, trust me. It's going to take some time. It took you some time to build up your barriers around your behavioral patterns now. It's going to take some time to interrupt them, right? But when leaders work the pause principle consistently, here's the shift. It shifts in 4 areas. There's less emotional intensity and conflict, because they begin to recognize, like, hey, it's not, it doesn't need to go high and right every time. There's less emotional intensity, and therefore there's greater clarity about the internal state of the nervous system and what's taking place. And there's an increased sense of self control. And guess who notices? The team's going to notice. There's more intentional engagement across every relationship, not a small shift. They'll notice at work, they'll notice at home. It's a transformation of the relational environment. In the coaching space, we love to use the word transformation. Hey, you're going to get a 90-day reset or a 6-month, coaching cohort, which are fantastic. I offer those in my personal practice, right? Because we want to see people move from A to Z. We want to see them achieve and have a roadmap for clarity and for transformation. We want them to transform their lives. We want them to live healthy. We want them to make as much money make. We want them to have great family lives. We want them to have great relationship with God and with others, right? We want them to be good stewards of what they have. And when we get stuck in our emotional relational dysfunctional patterns that will push against everything else when we feel like we're being threatened, is sometimes when we need to engage a coach to say, hey, I need to take action here. You know what? Because when we take action is when we start to gain back clarity. We start to understand these principles. We start to put them into practice, and we will change our lives. We will change. We will absolutely change our lives. Whatever stage of life you're in 1 year, you can change so many things. In 5 years, you can look back and be like, whew, I don't even know who that person was 5 years ago, right? So my journey began a long time ago, but when I shared that story about coming back from Iraq and the different ways that I dealt with that stress, right? Here it is now, 2026, right? So we are 11 years after my dad passed away. We are 9 years after the train wreck of a divorce. And I got to tell you, with the work that's been done in me, after going from corporate America into business ownership, into full-time ministry, out of full-time ministry, and back into the marketplace, and just really experiencing some really tough, traumatic events, even over the course of the last 5 years. Looking back 5 years ago, I'm a different person today. Why? Because we continue to do the work. We can't get stuck. We can't keep leaving a wake of past relational issues. We need to learn from them, and we need to move forward in them. So consistently stepping into the pause principle, right? Building it in, you will become a more calm, a more stable, you will have more clarity and more focus, a larger sense of self-control. You will have more intentional engagement across every single relationship. Like I said, this pause is small, but it is so big. It's not a small shift. It's a transformation of the relational environment. But we got to get off the couch. We got to learn to do something differently. We have to go touchy-feely sometimes. If you're a guy that doesn't, that's too much emotion for me, you got to get there if you want things to change. I posted something on Facebook yesterday that said, if you change nothing, nothing will change. Something to that effect, right? If you make no changes, then nothing will change. So you could sit and complain and be bitter and have animosity in your heart and mistrust, and that's perfectly where you want to be. You don't necessarily want to be there, but it's where you are because it's comfortable. You're gonna get uncomfortable. The pause is going to feel unnatural at first, especially for us fast movers, right? Slowing down to respond feels like surrendering the competitive advantage that got you to where you are today. Speed has always been your edge. Accuracy, right? Hesitating has always been, well, too bad for that guy. They should have moved. They should have zigged instead of zagged. Instead, we have this fear underneath about appearing weak or uncertain, or we have a conditioned belief that immediate response equals authority, or that proving ourselves through speed, even when speed creates damage. The strongest leaders aren't the fastest responders, believe They're the most intentional responders. The pause isn't indecision, it's poise. It's not hesitation, it is presence. It signals I'm not at the mercy of my triggers. And that's not weakness, that's command. The pause doesn't weaken your leadership, it stabilizes it. And people always feel the difference between a leader who reacts and a leader who chooses, always. And the pause changes how you're experienced before you even say a single word. All right, so as we get ready to land the plane in this episode, I just want to finish up with 3 shifts that cleanly take place when you step into the pause principle. You're going to shift. The first shift is from reaction to presence. You might not have the answer immediately, and that's okay. And that's freedom. The second shift is from speed to clarity. All right, the slower your responses, you're going to yield some better outcomes, and the quality of what you say improves dramatically when it originates from a grounded place. And then the third shift is from proving to grounding. You don't have to prove anymore. You've earned a seat at the table. You don't have to earn your seat in every single moment. Your identity isn't on trial in every conversation. So we need to be aware of that. That's the freedom piece as well. Listen, if you have enjoyed this episode, I want you to go ahead and share it with a friend. We're now finally on, I think, most platforms. The YouTube channel, the Tension Lab, is starting to get some really good traction as well. We're getting new subscribers every week. And a lot of it is due to the shorts, the short reels that are coming out of some of this long form content. But I appreciate all the organic growth that's taken place just over the last couple of months, because what we found is that we're onto something, is that we're speaking to people that have a desire to connect. We experience these things together and we learn every step of the way in community. If you landed here, you're like, man, I just need to find my people. Congratulations, you have found your people. So until next time, I'm your host, Rudy Swigert. This is the Tension Lab. I look forward to chatting with you again.
This is the tension, the pattern you can't see. This is the moment you finally break free. Know what's running on.